second grade. Today we're working on lesson 8-7, which is continuing to partition rectangles and work on some strategies. Today we're going to only be using one square pattern block to partition our rectangle. So you should have started on the math message and possibly finished it, and now we're going to go over some solutions. And since I don't have anyone to share strategies with, I'll just share a couple with all of you that are listening, and maybe you used one of mine, or if you're thinking to yourself you use something different, that's okay too. So I have to take my one square pattern block and I have to break this rectangle up into equal squares. So squares of equal parts. So one strategy might be to line up your one pattern block and then trace right under it. Trace a row that goes underneath your pattern block. And I can see that this is one row. How many blocks are going to fit in this one row? You're right, two. One here and one here. So in this row, I can see that I have two equal squares that fit. Now I'm going to take my one square pattern block and I'm going to move it down and line it up. Remember, I don't want to have any overlaps or any gaps, so I try to line it up as close with my line as I can. And then I'm going to trace right under it again. And I notice that again, two blocks will fit in this row. And the goal is that for each row you make, you have the same number of blocks. And here I'm going to make one more row with two blocks. So that's one strategy you can use. Just taking your square pattern block and kind of tracing around it and seeing what fits. Another possible option, and this also works when you're using a bigger rectangle that you need to partition, is to sort of move the pattern block around and mark it with your pen or pencil. So if I start with my pattern block up here, I might just make a mark underneath my pattern block. Oh, I should make it thinner. Underneath my pattern block. And then you can move it down and make another mark. And so I'm just sort of marking off where my rows are going to go. And then I can draw my lines, and I see I can draw a row here where the block was, and here where my block was. And so now I've made three equal size rows. And remember, I'm just freehand drawing, so I'm making them as equal and as straight as possible, and you'll be doing the same. And then I take my pattern block again and I look and I see, well, how many blocks will fit in each row? And I can quickly see that two blocks will fit in this row. And you might be saying, Ms. Williams, why are you doing so many? You can already see that it's two. Why are you doing every row? And I'm doing that because sometimes you're going to have more than three rows, and it'll be tricky to line it up, so you want to probably mark each row. So as you can see, I have three rows that go this way, with two blocks in each row. These are my columns. So I have two columns with three blocks in each column. So those are two strategies you might have used. Today's math message asks you how many rows of squares. We have three rows of squares. How many squares in each row? 1, 2. 2 squares in each row. It also asks, how many squares did you draw to cover the whole rectangle? We drew 6 squares to cover the rectangle. And remember, it's important that your squares are all of equal size. I'm going to talk about what happens when you're asked to partition a rectangle into the same size squares without using a square pattern block or without using a sample size square to cover your shape. So if I was asked to cover this rectangle in 2 rows, let's type that out. 2 rows with 3 equal-sized squares in each row, I have to think about how I want to break my rectangle up. So take a minute and just kind of look. How do you think we might break this rectangle up? We have to make 2 rows with 3 equal-sized squares in each row. So maybe I might start by making a row down here. How does that look? You're right, that doesn't look right. These rows are not of equal sizes. This row is much bigger than this row. So you want them to be equal because remember, we're breaking it into equal sized parts. So if I need 2 rows, I might look for the middle, and I'm just eyeballing it, so I'm doing the best I can. And I would say that's about the middle. So now I have a row up top and a row down below that are about the same size. And now I need 3 equal sized squares in each row. So I need to make 3 columns that are about equal size. So maybe I'll make one here and one here. How does that look, second grade? You're right, there's something wrong. These squares are not equal size. Yes, I have 3 squares in each row, but they are not the same size. So I want to move them around a little bit and play with them to break them apart, to try to get them to be as equal as I can. And I'm just drawing this freehand, so I just want to make it as close as I can, and that looks pretty good to me. When you're working today, you try your best to break up your rectangles into equal rows with squares that are the same size shape in each row. Try your best to finish page 206 and 207 and partition your rectangles, and then work on page 208 to review your addition